Moving on to Section 1, the illusion of the break and the invisible buildup. Like we just talked about, estrangement almost never starts with a giant dramatic explosion. For years, the relationship looks perfectly normal from the outside, but underneath, it's wearing down layer by layer. So what's actually causing this invisible wear and tear? It's a concept psychologists call microtrauma. This isn't about one massive, catastrophic event. It's hundreds of tiny dismissals. It's that subtle criticism completely disguised as concern. It's a boundary being pushed just a little further every single year, or a dismissive tone basically telling you your feelings just don't matter. Now, individually, sure, these moments seem minor. You brush them off. But together, they accumulate over decades. It's exactly like sediment settling at the bottom of a river, eventually creating a deeply toxic and completely exhausting psychological climate. And the absolutely crucial point here is how this constant emotional depletion forces your body to respond long before your mind actually decides to leave. You know the feeling. You tense up before the phone even rings. You find yourself actively rehearsing conversations in your head before family gatherings just to survive them. You literally shrink parts of your personality just to keep the peace. What you might have once excused as just, typical family dynamics is actually chronic anxiety completely woven into your daily life. Long before the break happens, the absolute exhaustion sets in. Now let's look at Section 2, the dysfunctional cast, where roles are assigned, not discovered. Okay, let's walk through this quickly. In toxic or narcissistic family systems, children really aren't allowed to just grow up and discover their true selves. Instead, they're forced to abandon their authenticity to fulfill specific functions that the family demands to stay balanced. Look at the golden child, tasked with fulfilling the family's grand narrative of success, which completely costs them their genuine authenticity. Then you have the scapegoat, blamed for all the tension. Ironically, they're often the healthiest one in the room, but they absorb everybody's shame. There's the truth teller, who outright refuses to accept the dysfunction. The invisible child, who learns early on that needing attention is dangerous, so they survive by just disappearing. And finally, the parentified child, who carries the heavy emotional weight of their own parents. Now, here's the kicker. When you finally try to step out of one of these assigned roles to become a whole independent human being, you suddenly become a direct threat to the entire family system. The system pushes back hard, and honestly, that resistance is often what forces the final exit. This brings us to Section 3, the empty well and why they stay. If the environment is this damaging, it begs the question, why do people endure years, sometimes literally decades, of emotional neglect before finally stepping away? Well, the answer lies in two incredibly powerful psychological forces. The first one is trauma bonding. This happens when moments of genuine harm become deeply intertwined with incredibly inconsistent moments of warmth. A cutting remark is suddenly followed by a tearful apology. A week of cold silence is followed by a rare, surprising expression of affection. And your nervous system, it actually gets conditioned to confuse this wild inconsistency with real love. You start to truly believe that if you just try a little harder or act a little better, you'll finally earn that version of the parent you so desperately need. It keeps you walking back to an empty well over and over again. And that feeds perfectly into the second force, the hope cycle. This is a heartbreaking pattern of constantly waiting and forgiving based entirely on who a parent could be, rather than accepting who they consistently are. People stay because society constantly tells them that protecting themselves makes them selfish. I need to be clear about this. Leaving is almost never about a lack of love. It is the agonizing realization that the cycle simply isn't going to change. It's knowing that staying means slowly losing pieces of yourself while waiting around for a magical breakthrough moment that sadly is never going to come. Let's turn to Section 4, survival strategies and the mechanisms of distance. When someone finally hits that point where they realize they absolutely must protect themselves, creating distance isn't some dramatic declaration of anger. It's not an act of revenge. It's actually a highly structured, carefully thought-out strategy for self-protection, and it operates on a sliding scale. Step 1 is low contact. This basically means keeping all interactions surface level, shortening visits. You're effectively saying, listen, I care, but you can't have unlimited access to my inner life anymore. Step 2 is gray rock, which is achieving total emotional neutrality. And then step 3 is no contact, total separation. It's so important to understand that no contact is rarely the very first move. It is almost always the absolute last resort, utilized only after all those lesser boundaries, like low contact, have been systematically bulldozed and ignored by the family. A super crucial part of this toolkit is the gray rock method. If you haven't heard of it, it's a technique designed to minimize emotional engagement by making yourself entirely neutral, completely predictable, and totally unreactive. literally as boring as a gray rock. Let's be very clear here. Gray rock is not coldness or cruelty. Actually, scratch that. It's more like a brilliant, highly effective shield against manipulation. You intentionally stop reacting because reacting is the exact fuel that powers the family's old toxic patterns of conflict and guilt. Take away the fuel and the fire goes out.
Now, let's explore Section 5, the hidden cost and the grief of freedom.
When you finally step away and the daily chaos stops, your nervous system can literally exhale for the first time in years. But that relief doesn't arrive alone. It comes alongside a deeply conflicted, incredibly heavy aftermath of intense grief and guilt. Psychologists refer to this as ambiguous loss. You are essentially mourning someone who is still alive. They're still walking around, they're probably still posting happy photos online at Christmas, but they remain emotionally completely unreachable to you. You're grieving the parent you never actually had and the relationship you wished for your entire childhood. And the hardest part, this unique mourning period completely lacks a funeral. There's no socially recognized closure. It feels especially agonizing during those quiet holiday seasons when everyone else seems totally wrapped in family warmth, and you're just quietly navigating this massive, invisible grief. The emotional cost of freedom is the heartbreak of choosing your well-being over your history. If you are watching this explainer and experiencing this right now, I really want to reassure you, this complicated, messy guilt is completely normal. I know it feels like choosing peace somehow makes you disloyal to the people who raised you, but you have to know it is the necessary price of stopping a generational cycle of pain, a cycle that, frankly, you are never ever meant to carry in the first place. Which brings us to our final part, Section 6, the rebirth and breaking the generational cycle. Estrangement is not an ending. For a lot of people, it is the courageous, incredible beginning of a life that is no longer defined by emotional starvation. It's about taking the pen back and writing your own story. Once the constant noise finally quiets down, this beautiful, buried sense of self begins to emerge. It's a very slow, tender rebuilding process. You finally start asking what you actually want for dinner or out of life. You stop the constant apologies for simply existing. You begin to trust that inner voice that was silenced for way too long. Most importantly, you start reparenting yourself with gentleness. And the best part? All of this is finally possible because your decisions are no longer being filtered through this exhausting fear of family judgment or punishment. The cycle breaks not when you walk away from the family you were born into, but when you begin building the family your spirit always needed. And this brilliantly illustrates the beautiful concept of a family of choice. We aren't just bound by blood. It's about finding a partner who actually listens to you, friends who truly feel like home, and surrounding yourself with communities built on genuine mutual respect, warmth, and emotional honesty. Building a life based on shared values rather than just shared DNA and obligation. So as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a really provocative question to think about. What does family genuinely mean to you? And are you ready to build the family your spirit always needed? Because walking away, it just means you finally stopped walking back into the fire just because you were told to. It means you chose clarity over confusion, and you chose your healing over your history. I warmly invite you to reflect on this, keep pushing forward on your healing journey, and please give yourself the absolute permission to redefine your own future. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.